Hello again, I'm Greg Anderson. There are three people vying for your vote on May 19th for state representative in the 5th Barnstable District. One of them is here with me today. Jim Dever, who you may know from his long run on the Sandwich School Committee, is next on Meet the Candidates. Well, I have known this guy for, I don't know, feels like 50 years, but it's actually probably been maybe about 5 years, 4 years. But Jim Dever, who we know from the Sandwich School Committee, but you are running for state rep. Welcome to the program, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great, Greg. Thanks for having me here today. I certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, well, you know, as I've said to you, and we've seen each other on many occasions, and in our studio conversations, there's such a commitment to try to get the word out about candidates, and so I've done some research on you, and I'm eager to learn your perspective. So let me ask you the first thing that I'm asking almost every person: how is it running a campaign during a pandemic?
It is different. Thankfully, when it came to signatures, I didn't have any issue with that because whenever I run for office or take out papers, I know it's something I'm committed to. I like to take out papers day one, and I like to try to return them as soon as possible.
Hmm.
So I really didn't have any issues with that. But as to the general campaigning, it is different. It's a lot more of this on social media, and without a doubt, I miss the old-fashioned campaigning. I'm a people person. I love talking to folks. I was looking forward to going door to door. Even bought a new pair of sneakers all set for this.
Oh,
Uh,
no kidding.
yeah, bigshoes.com. There's their plug. But but yeah, but yeah, with what everybody else is going through, obviously it pales in comparison, and it's just having to adjust to the new situation.
Yeah.
Hopefully, as we go down the road, we'll be able to kind of interact a bit more. But for now, it really is just restricted to this and doing social media.
Now, for those who do not know, what is your career? What do you do for work?
Well, it actually dovetails perfectly into running for state rep. I am a labor attorney. And what that means, I'm an attorney for a union, and I'm an attorney that represents the International Brotherhood of Police Officers, the International Association of EMTs and Paramedics, and NAGE, which is the National Association of Government Employees, which are your admin employees at the state and federal level.
Okay.
And why this dovetails into being a state representative, in essence, being a labor lawyer is constituent services. My constituency this time is police officers, EMTs, workers for the Commonwealth. We have some firefighters down in New Jersey. So it's kind of the same thing as making sure they're treated fairly at work. And now it's just kind of expanding the constituency base as a state representative and making sure everybody else gets a fair shake as well. So I am a labor attorney is the short answer.
Tell me what motivated you to run for Randy Hunt's seat as state representative.
You know, it's interesting. As I've told people before, I would not have challenged Randy. You know, I thought Randy was doing a fairly good job. Obviously, there's some issues we just disagree on. But for me, and it hasn't changed with COVID, the reason has only been exemplified with COVID. Being a member of the Sandwich School Committee for 6 years, every spring we go to town meeting, and I'm sure it's the same in Bourne, Barnstable, Plymouth, and we go to town meeting and we seem to be arguing amongst ourselves over resources. Do we hire a teacher? Do we pave a road? Do we buy a fire truck? And just for too long, we've been kind of debating amongst ourselves and not getting our fair share from Beacon Hill. So what my purpose to doing this is to try to do that, try to get the Barnstable Fifth our fair share. We sent an awful lot of money up to Boston, but we haven't placed ourselves in the best position to get our resources back. And something that I bring for the first time in 20 years, I'll be a voice in the majority on Beacon Hill. And that is a world of difference when it comes to funding for our schools, funding for our firefighters, our public service. So the reason why I got into this mainly was for local aid to try to help us stop the arguing amongst ourselves and get more resources back from Beacon Hill. And that is never more important than it's going to be right now with the COVID.
Your campaign messages, Jim: environment, first responders, domestic violence, seniors, and funding. Those are the items on your platform, and I want to get into as many as of those as I can. But let me first talk to you a little bit about this pandemic. Right now, the governor has rolled out his first really reopen plan, which is the 4 phases. And there's a whole lot of yes, let's open, and no, let's not. And there's a great deal of people in the middle saying, I'm not quite sure what to believe. If the governor were to call State Representative Dever and say, okay, I got to get this open. Tell me what you need, what you want, and how does this reopen look to you for your district? What would you say?
I think the first thing that we need to reopen for and for our district in the Barnstable Fifth is we've got to help small business. That is the number one thing we need to do. That in public schools is what makes a town. So something that's really concerning me is, there has been some relief efforts for small businesses from the federal level, but it certainly hasn't been enough. And then when it comes to our small business folks trying to make rent and paying their landlords, that's going to be a big issue as we go down the road. So if I was to speak to the governor, and I would without a doubt accept his call and talk to him, this is of the utmost importance, is to say, how can we better make our small business community open for our general community? I think that's the number one thing we need to focus on.
How do you prioritize? And I know that this is a moving target, if you will, but how do you prioritize? Is it restaurants first? Is it the churches? Is it what is it when you look at that bucket of small business?
I think what the first thing you have to open with is what the health and safety people feel is the safest way to open. I mean, it's going to depend on how large of a grouping can we have in these locations, be it a religious facility, be it a restaurant, or even a store, even a small
Mhm.
business. So really, I think that that's what it comes down to. I'm one of these people that if, our nurses and our doctors are putting their lives on the front line for us, not only do I want to thank them, I wanted to listen to what they say.
Mhm.
And I feel as though once they give us a better idea of the size of the gatherings we can do together, then I think that'll be a good blueprint as to how we open it. For instance, they seem to have thought, golf courses and whatnot were a good idea because, smaller groups and they're somewhat farther apart. I spend most of my time in the woods at a golf course, but trying to track the ball down. But
You and me both.
so I think that would be the number one thing, just trying to get what sort of size of groups can we have together at first,
Yeah.
and to try to figure that out.
When you look at people that are standing on the edge of the Sagamore Bridge and they're holding the signs to say "Open us up," um, they tend to believe, and I don't want to generalize too much, that there's a whole lot of hype, that there's a whole lot of the media. How do you come down on? Is this too much hype? Is this too much drama?
It's funny you should say that. I don't have to look to the Sagamore Bridge or the news. I just have to look to my in-laws. Um, so, and it's their point of view, and I love having those conversations with them.
Yeah.
One of my best friends is the same way. What I try to think of it, that to me is a bit too of a global kind of situation. I try to tell people when it comes to those issues about the country and where we stand, is this a hoax or not a hoax? I try to say the Barnstable Fifth is ponds and oceans. Leave the swamps in DC. And I really think that's the importance of this, because the number one thing as a state representative is serving your constituency, and that's the Barnstable Fifth. So I like to listen to what the other side says. I don't find it as alarming as other folks because they're entitled to their opinion, and I just try to bring that in, dissect it a bit, and then decide whether or not it's worthwhile to the folks in the Barnstable Fifth.
Let's talk a little bit about the environment. You state on your website, quote, "The future is clean energy with a focus on wind, water, and solar." As a newly elected state representative, what exactly would you focus your energies on relative to those three items?
Those that's the future of not only Cape Cod but really the Barnstable Fifth as well. it is the environment. And when people talk about, a Green New Deal, I look at the green to represent money as well. I just think we have a tremendous opportunity here on Cape Cod. We have all the natural resources right here: sun, solar, well, sun, solar, the same thing, wind, and energy. And we have an educational system that I think can utilize those, and really make Cape Cod, I don't know, a centerpiece, if you will, for this new Green Deal sort of situation. I think there's just tremendous opportunity there for us to not only help the environment, but we help our businesses when we're more energy efficient, and we help our student population as well. I've always thought that with the natural resources we have, the educational opportunities we have, that there could be a natural flow to use Cape Cod Community College tied more into the Woods Hole folks and really make a path for our students that they leave high school and they don't even have to go too far. They can stay right here on Cape Cod because we can have green jobs here. And that, as I say, not only helps the environment, that's the economy as well. And that's why I think it's so important on Cape Cod for that.
When you look at the Fifth Barnstable district, it consists of all of Sandwich, a part of Bourne, Barnstable, and Plymouth. And as you were saying, ponds and coastline and ocean and lakes. When we look at some of these environmental issues, Sandwich has beach erosion issues. How do you prioritize on those town-specific issues if you were to be state rep?
Well, I think when it comes to the town-specific issues, and again, these are going to be specific to the folks in Bourne, in Plymouth, in Barnstable.
Mhm.
I think what we need is somebody that can bring these environmentalists together that have different, agendas and ideas, and how to make them work best for us. And the reason why I say that, it sticks out in my mind. I remember not too many years ago driving around, the Cape Cod, and on the exact same day, I saw protesters for Cape Cod wind, protesters for coal, and protesters for another energy resource.
Mhm.
What we have to do is we understand everybody has their concerns, but we got to work together to find out what's the best way forward when it comes to those concerns. And when it comes to Sandwich, beach erosion is the number one issue. We've got to find out some way to protect our coastline before our coastline entrenches really onto Route 6A and further.
Yeah. Let's shift gears, talk about first responders. They're very important to you. Clearly, it's your line of work as it relates to the importance of from an employment perspective. But man, what those men and women are going through right now, it's a big deal to go into a house you've never been in, to a potentially dangerous situation on a normal day, not to mention with all of this pandemic. Give me some specifics as it relates to how you want to support first responders in a Dever administration.
The number one thing that I've learned from representing police and EMTs for these last 20 years, and really, and police officers on the Cape, I've represented the Yarmouth Police, Dennis, I represent the Sandwich Police, and what I've learned from them and from across the country is the importance of PTSD. I mean, the trauma that these folks undertake on a daily basis is the number one thing that has to be treated. And this is going to extend to nurses. This is going to extend, the teachers are going to have some of this. But when your question was first responders, and when it comes to first responders, I'll give you a perfect example. I was representing an officer once, and there was an issue at work. And what the officer said is, Jim, I got to tell you what's happened this week. This isn't an excuse for behavior at work, but just so you know. And within that week, this officer had resuscitated a 2-year-old baby in a bathtub. The officer had responded to a scene of a stabbing in which it was one of the players he used to coach. And the player's going, Coach, don't let me die.
Oh my
People
God.
don't realize what these first responders see on a daily basis. And NAGE, the International Association of EMTs and Paramedics, and the International Brotherhood of Police Officers, we've been on the forefront to pass legislation so PTSD is considered an in-the-line work injury. That is the number one thing, because you might twist your ankle at work as a first responder, and sure, you're injured on the job and you'll get the proper care. But what if it's a mental issue? It's very difficult to say, and insurance companies are very quick to say, "Oh no, that's not on our dime." So some states, we've testified down in Connecticut. I know California has a pretty good PTSD program for first responders. So that would be without a doubt the number one thing I would go to help people with.
I think that that's a very important issue. I've often thought, you see these, news stories of car accidents and kids and the opioid issues. And in the context of 200 words in a newspaper, you get the story, but what's not there is exactly what you're talking about. What did Officer Smith experience and absorb when he looked at a 16-year-old dead behind the wheel?
100%. Yeah, correct.
So when you look at this from a legislation perspective, is this something that you would craft legislation and work towards that?
Correct. Yeah, there's actually some great legislation going before the House of Representatives right now that is on just that, dealing with COVID-19, and the idea of, if you do come with, if you do get COVID-19 and have to miss work, it's considered an in the line duty sort of injury. So you don't have to use your own time. So you will be, compensated. Those are the exact types of piece of legislation that not only that I support, that I would craft myself.
Yeah, I have an observation on this, that it's not about me, it's about you, but you know me, and I'll make it about me if I want to make it about me. Yeah, I tend to do that. I'm watching this whole pandemic impact our first responders and those in the hospitals, and we call them heroes, and in so many ways they are. But to your point about the emotional impact on this, there is a very heightened level of anxiety that one, as a doctor in an ER or a police officer or an EMT, is taking with them when they get out of bed in the morning and say, I got to do this again. And the emotional piece is, they don't feel like heroes when they feel like they can't be strong enough. And that's a this is the stuff that we talk about now that we never have before.
Oh, and it's so true. It's something that, as I say, having done this for 20 years, I have been aware of it, and it is something that you have to spend so much attention to, because people love a story in which, oh, maybe a first responder does something wrong because of the distress of the job. They love to print that story, but they never really go into behind why something like that occurred.
Yeah.
And that is that is often the hidden secret that people don't know.
Let's talk a little bit about education. You are definitely focused on, at least from the Sandwich School Committee perspective, on the education system. How are you assessing all of this impact on our students and teachers, and what things look like as we go towards the fall?
It's interesting because when I said at first I get into this because of funding issues in public schools and folks going back and forth, what do we do? And now, not only is that important, but we also need to craft a plan going forward. I mean, the way the teachers have responded on the fly like this is, I shouldn't say it's beyond belief, because I knew we have incredible teachers, but it really has, to switch from a physical concrete building to a virtual learning computer education program over the span of a couple of weeks is truly amazing.
Yeah.
But there's some kids being lost along the way. And that's why I'm excited to go to Beacon Hill. Because again, it's going to take somebody that can bring folks together to map out how we go forward with education. I mean, what this obviously is not going to be going away in the fall. And is there going to be something else down the road? So it's going to take a lot of negotiation and a lot of hard thinking to find out what is the best plan. And I think I'm uniquely crafted in that way, because as a member of the school committee, just last fall, I was the recipient of the Mass Association of School Superintendents and the Mass Association of School Committees Award for an All-Star member. And I think it's the ability to have the trust of those parties and the trust of the teachers, because that's what you need when you form a plan going forward. You need the trust of all parties. And I think I have the trust of all three parties, and I can get them in a room and help craft how we do this going forward. As I said, it's been pretty impressive on the fly, but we really need to think about the best way going forward with how to educate our kids through
Yeah.
something like this.
When you talk about the kids that are getting lost, lost in the shuffle here, that ties back to this PTSD. You know, the emotional impact on teachers to say, you know, I needed that child to be in my classroom because I bring happiness that that child is not getting at home. And now, even if it's in Zoom or any other contact, the teacher is kind of a lot more closer to the home issues than they were before.
Not only that, and when we think about our kids who receive special education, you know, often these kids, you teach them through sensory activity, through touch, through feel, through seeing, through talking. And that is just not something that you can do on Zoom effectively.
Right.
So you really have, you know, that end of the spectrum. Are they truly being served the best way they can? And I don't think they are.
Yeah.
Then you have to think about, you know, the homes that can't afford to have internet. I mean,
Right.
public education is supposed to be free. So now we're saying you got to pay Comcast to have. Now Comcast has done a great job in offering up some programs that get internet at a much more reasonable rate. But still, going forward, we got to realize this is public education. How do we do that and keep it public as opposed to having a
Yeah.
private entity be part of it as well?
When we talk about domestic violence, I know it's so heavy. We're talking about all these heavy subjects, but you know, this is one I can see very clearly is something you're very passionate about. And when you look at this whole pandemic, my wife thought I was crazy early on. March, I said to her, "I'm watching the news." When I was watching too much news, and it was really starting to affect me, and I was getting, you know, pretty frustrated about what was going on.
Sure.
And I said, you know, I can't imagine what life is like for people who live in unhappy marriages, abusive relationships, kids who are abused, where going to work was the respite.
Correct.
You know, going to school was the respite, and now you can't do that. And I thought of that when I saw, and of course, my wife thought I was crazy. She's like, "Why are you being so dark?" And I said, "Well, I'm really not. I'm just concerned."
Sure.
When you look at domestic violence, you're calling for more support. Explain that. Give me some examples of what you feel needs to change as it relates to our fight against domestic violence.
Well, again, it comes down to the idea of how is the best way to treat folks who are in a situation of domestic violence. When I was a student at Suffolk Law School, I was lucky enough to take place in the Battered Women's Advocacy Program, which is a program at Suffolk Law School where you go to court and you're the attorney for victims of domestic violence. And you see firsthand how intimidating the system is and how challenging it is. You know, and when you're a victim of domestic violence, it takes a lot of courage to come forward. And I think what we need to do is to make it easier for people to come forward. You know, right now there's a downturn in reports of domestic violence and abuse at home. And people think that's a good thing. Well, no, it's a bad thing, because what's going on is people just don't know how to reach out to those resources right now and get the help they need. And that is something that, you know, from Suffolk Law School to even right now, above me in age, are the good folks of Dove, which is a domestic violence organization as well. And just, you know, getting to talk to them on a daily basis and understanding the issues out there. The best thing we can do is to make it easier for victims of domestic violence to come forward. That's the safest way to try to go about it.
When we talk about infrastructure, changing gears, when we talk about infrastructure, the bridges, we all know they need to be replaced. We know that there's a plan for that. What is your role as state representative as it relates to the focus on the bridges?
Well, the number one role is to make sure that the feds, who are the big players in this, are living up to their end of the bargain. Congressman Keating and Senator Markey are good friends of mine. I mean, I started my career with Senator Markey when he was a congressman back in 1994 doing constituent services for his office. So we need to make sure and have a communication line open to the feds, which is something I can bring. And when it comes to the state level, we need to make sure that the state players are, living up to their end of the bargain as well.
Veterans. If I were a veteran, I am not a veteran, but if I were a veteran, young or old, within the 5th Barnstable District, what is your message to them to have them circled your name on the ballot?
My message to them is I've already been looking out for you for the last 20 years. As part of my job as a labor attorney, we represent employees at the various VAs throughout the United States. So I've talked to Veterans Affairs folks in South Carolina, in Massachusetts, in New York, and the number one thing I need them to know is I'm there for you because your care needs to be the best it can be. When I've gone to some of these VA facilities, and yes, that's a federal issue, more of a state issue, but just so our veterans know the passion I have for them and their service to our country is when you go to some of these VA facilities and you see the conditions, they're not great.
Right.
They're not great. So I've been fighting for 20 years to make their conditions much better. And to those veterans who, a lot of veterans now served on our police departments.
Mm-hmm.
And again, being with the IBPO, I've had numerous opportunities to talk to them. And I know how important, again, it is when it comes to mental health and care to make sure they're getting the treatment they can. So to the veterans out there, I'd say I've already been fighting to make sure you get the best treatment possible at the federal level. Now let's do it at the state level.
Seniors. Give me some examples of what you would do for seniors, let's say in the first 6 months of a new of you having become state representative.
Well, seniors, we need to figure out, number one, COVID, what's going on with COVID-19 and how to make these facilities safer, if you will, where most of our seniors are. Like most people my age, I'm 48, we're kind of that generation that is, not only do we have our own kids, but now our own parents are aging now and they're living longer, which is great, but also with living longer comes the consequences. And one reason my wife and I moved to Cape Cod is my parents are over in West Yarmouth, summer home, now year-round home, and it's hard. It's hard. You could build a Taj Mahal for seniors to go to, but you got to get them there. And that's the hardest obstacle to overcome. So I would think when it comes to our seniors, again, what's the best way we can serve them to help them get over that mental block and be able to reach out to, there's so many great facilities, especially here on Cape Cod and the Barnstable Fifth. But sometimes, I just know from my own personal experience, seniors are timid as to how to reach out to those resources. So we need to make it easier for them to reach the help that they can and make them more capable of going to get that help.
I always say it's really tough raising parents these days.
It
It really is. Last couple of questions, and as we round out our time together, on your website, you say, as it relates to funding, you say, we in the Barnstable Fifth pay enough in taxes. What we are interested in is getting more of a return on our taxes and less wasteful spending. Our candidacy is best suited to deliver on both desires. How so?
Perfectly. Well, when it comes to funding, and I kind of touched on this at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
the Barnstable Fifth, for the first time in 20 years, can have a voice in the majority. And that is so important on Beacon Hill. Folks may not know, but there's about 160 representatives up on Beacon Hill, and I'd say 130 are in the Democratic Party, the majority party. Just being in that party, it brings you from the kids' table to the adults' table, and it makes a tremendous difference. When it comes to knocking out fraud, waste, and abuse, again, I've seen it these last 20 years. I'm a union attorney going up against state agencies every day, and I see where state agencies are making mistakes. I'll give you a quick example. Two employees I recently represented for the Commonwealth, they worked for the same department. Both had been terminated. They were out 2 years. We're at arbitration. I'm representing the employee to get him his job back. And within 2 hours, the Commonwealth has settled and given him his job back. Now, I may be a great attorney, but I'm not that great. The point being, somebody along the way should have realized this was a colossal mistake. Not only have we wasted resources on having to pay unemployment for an employee that didn't need to be terminated, we've upset morale, we've spent money on arbitrations. It's kind of the hidden secret that folks don't realize, that one thing in common to every state agency is the Department of Labor Relations. That is something I have an expertise in to make those work more efficiently. That will save us taxpayer dollars. And I'm somebody that thinks we pay an awful lot in taxes. Let's start finding ways to save our money. And that's a terrific way for us to save our money.
Jim, let me wrap up. I want to ask you a couple of quick questions. Term limits, yes or no?
No.
Is Trump going to win re-election?
I would say 50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
50-50.
Who will Joe Biden pick as his number 2?
I hope it's an Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. I was a Klobuchar fan early on and was ready to vote for her on primary day. She stepped out a couple of days before and said, throw our support behind Joe. And without a doubt, I can stand behind Joe. Because again, going back to working families and labor, Joe was with our Stop and Shop workers well before COVID-19. And that's the type of person I think that I, without a doubt, can get behind.
What do you do for fun, Jim Dever?
For
girls?
For fun these days, it's wiffle ball games in the backyard with Seamus and Brianna.
Nice.
That's the extent of it. And they're getting good.
Yeah.
It's the point where I'm not supposed to, I said, do I let them win? And it's not even let. They can, they're knocking it out of the park. So
yeah,
we're having the fun the best way we can, just confined to our home right now.
Yeah. Well, my friend, I hope everyone is safe and healthy in your family. I trust that they are.
They are indeed. Same to you.
Excellent. Thank you. Jim Dever, running for state rep in the 5th Barnstable District. Thank you so much for taking the time to out of your wiffle ball game. I'm assuming you're wearing like athletic shorts and sneakers below the shirt and tie.
First pitch once we wrap up this. So yes.
You got it. Jim Dever, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate that.
Greg, thanks for having me. Great to talk to you as always.
All right. I just want to say, stay right there, Jim. I just want to thank all of you for joining us. We're really trying to get the word out in their own words of those who are seeking your vote on May 19th. I'm Greg Anderson, and I'll see you soon.